A teenage boy in a wheelchair runs away from home after years of silence and a painful clash with his father. On the city streets, he faces the harsh reality of exclusion and loneliness until a 9-year-old homeless girl approaches him. Coming from opposite worlds, the two find comfort in each other amid chaos and pain. This unlikely friendship will forever redefine what family means to everyone involved. The penthouse in Lincoln Park reflected the success of Richard Foster, founder of RF Technologies, one of the most promising software companies in the United States. The glass panels of the 4,000-square-foot duplex apartment offered a privileged view of Chicago, that seemingly endless sea of concrete. Within that impeccably decorated space, everything functioned with technological perfection. The curtains opened on their own, the temperature was always pleasant, and even the coffee maker started brewing the exact moment the alarm went off. Everything perfect, everything controlled except for Matthew's heart. Seated in his automated wheelchair, the 15-year-old boy watched the city from his bedroom window. His dark, restless eyes, a trait inherited from his mother who had been gone for 5 years, scanned the landscape without truly seeing it. In his hands, crumpled from being reread so many times, was the envelope that would change everything. "Matthew, are you ready yet?" Richard's deep voice echoed down the hall. The boy quickly tucked the envelope under his pillow. His heart raced. He had received that letter 3 weeks ago and still hadn't found the courage to show it to his father. "Just finishing up," he replied, adjusting the shirt of his uniform from the city's most expensive private school. Richard appeared at the doorway, impeccable in a tailor-made Italian suit. At 47, he maintained the physique of a younger man, compensating for sleepless nights and business stress with daily sessions in the private gym installed on the floor below. "The driver is already waiting. Your breakfast is on the table." The same ritual every morning, the same phrases, the same look Matthew knew so well, a mixture of love, guilt, and that disguised pity he detested so much. At the breakfast table, Matthew chewed his whole wheat toast without appetite. He watched his father check emails on his tablet, responding to messages with the efficiency that had made him famous in the market. It was as if they were in parallel worlds, sharing the same physical space but emotionally light years apart. "Dad," Richard looked up for a moment. "Yes?" Matthew hesitated. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe he should show him the letter. Nothing. Forget it. Silence reigned once more, filled only by the clinking of silverware and the discreet hum of the electronic devices that surrounded their lives. That afternoon, after the driver dropped him off at home after school, Matthew unexpectedly found his father in the apartment. Richard rarely came home before 9 at night, and his presence outside the usual hours immediately put the teenager on high alert. "Did something happen?" Matthew asked, maneuvering his chair into the living room. Richard was standing next to the coffee table. In his hands was the envelope Matthew had hidden under his pillow. Time stood still. "What is this, Matthew?" Richard's voice was controlled, but Matthew knew that tone. It was the same one he used when an employee made a serious mistake. "How did you—" "Maria was tidying your room and found it. Why did you hide this from me?" Matthew felt his face burn. The maid, of course. He should have hidden it better. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Richard opened the envelope, pulling out the official paper bearing the letterhead of the National Young Writers Program, Special Triumph Edition. "You were accepted 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, Matthew." The boy took a deep breath, searching for courage. "I knew you wouldn't like it. And why wouldn't I like my son being selected for a writing program? Because it's a program for people with disabilities." Matthew's voice rose, releasing all his pent-up frustration. "And you hate it when I talk about it. You hate anything that reminds you that I'm like this." Richard paled. "That's not true." "Yes, it is. You built ramps in every corner of this apartment, bought the most expensive chair on the market, hired the best physical therapists, but you never ever talk about the accident. You never mention what I was like before, as if you were ashamed." "I'm not ashamed of you." Richard's voice trembled slightly. "Then why did you change the whole apartment but never take me swimming again? Why did you push away all my friends from back then? Why do you never ask how I feel?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. "Let me read the piece you submitted," he finally said, turning back to the envelope. "No!" But it was too late. But Richard was already reading the essay Matthew had written, titled The Invisible City. As he read, Richard's face hardened. Matthew had written about how people with disabilities were made invisible in the city, about the broken sidewalks, the lack of ramps, the pitying stares. But he had also written about his own personal invisibility, the loneliness inside his home, the father who saw him as a problem to be solved with money and technology, never as a teenager with dreams and frustrations. "Do you really feel this way?" Richard asked after finishing, his voice strangely subdued. "It's just an essay," Matthew said, looking away. "No, it's not. It's how you see me. As a villain. As someone who keeps you in a gilded cage." "Dad, I didn't mean—" "You accuse me of never talking about the accident? You want to know why? Because it was my fault." Richard's voice exploded, making Matthew recoil in his chair. "I insisted you jump from that high dive. I told you it was safe. I ruined your life, Matthew." The words fell like bombs in the silent room. 5 years of repressed guilt, of unshared pain overflowing all at once. "You think I'm ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of myself. Every ramp in this apartment, every modification, reminds me of my failure as a father. And now you write this, exposing our life to strangers to get what? Pity? Recognition?" Matthew felt tears streaming down his face. "I just wanted to be heard. By someone. By you." "Be heard? Or humiliate me publicly?" "It's not about you, it's about me, about how I feel." "Well, you should know that while you were writing about how terrible I am, I was negotiating with the best doctors in the country for new experimental therapies. While you were accusing me of trapping you, I was fighting to give you a chance to walk again." Matthew felt as if he'd been punched. "I never asked for that." "You didn't have to, it's my obligation." "Your obligation? Is that what I am to you, an obligation?" The argument escalated, years of silence transformed into shouts, words as sharp as knives, wounding deeply. "You're going to turn down this spot," Richard finally declared. "I won't allow you to expose yourself like this, to play the victim." It was the last straw. "You don't get to decide," Matthew yelled, turning his chair toward the door. "I'm going to participate whether you like it or not. As long as you live under my roof, then maybe I shouldn't live here anymore." Before Richard could respond, Matthew was already in the elevator, heading down to the ground floor with nothing but his cell phone in his pocket and a shattered heart in his chest. The sun was beginning to set as Matthew passed through the mirrored doors of the luxurious Elysian towers. Mr. Evans, the doorman who had known him since he was a small child, widened his eyes upon seeing him leave alone. "Matthew, where's your driver? Does your father know you're going out?" "It's okay, Mr. Evans. I'm just going to the park." The lie slipped out easily, despite his racing heart. Matthew had never gone out alone. Always with the driver or the physical therapist or his father. Always protected, always watched. "Are you sure, son? I can call Mr. Foster and—" "No!" Matthew took a deep breath, controlling his tone. "Please, I'll be right back." Evans hesitated but eventually nodded. After all, the park was less than 100 yards away. What danger could there be? As soon as he turned the corner, out of the doorman's watchful gaze, Matthew felt the first wave of freedom, and immediately after, the first obstacle, an uneven sidewalk with broken paving stones and no curb ramp. Exactly the kind of barrier he had described in his essay. Matthew adjusted the controls of his motorized chair, mentally thanking his father for investing in a model that could handle small obstacles. But as he moved away from the affluent neighborhood of Lincoln Park, the difficulties increased exponentially. Pedestrians rushed past, some swerving abruptly as if the chair were invisible, others casting that pitying glance he loathed. A businessman on his phone nearly collided with him, shooting an irritated look as if Matthew were in his way. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" the man asked impatiently. "Sorry," Matthew murmured, automatically backing up his chair. Years of formal education and social isolation made it difficult for him to confront strangers. As he moved down Wacker Drive, the heavy traffic and imposing architecture of the skyscrapers reminded Matthew that he was in the financial heart of Chicago. His father had an office on this very street, and for a moment Matthew felt the impulse to go there. But no. Richard would probably treat him like a runaway child, dragging him back to the apartment without truly listening to him. The sun was disappearing quickly, and with it the safety that daylight provided. The streets began to empty of workers and fill with vulnerable people seeking a place to spend the night. Matthew noticed the curious looks he attracted. A state-of-the-art electronic wheelchair was not a common sight in this part of the city, especially driven by a lone teenager. As he pressed on, the chair's battery began to show signs of draining. Matthew had never had to worry about that before. Maria always put the chair to charge every night, another of the many invisible details that made up his sheltered life. His stomach rumbled, reminding him that he hadn't had dinner. In fact, he hadn't even eaten breakfast properly. So great was his anxiety about the discovered letter. He checked his phone. 10 missed calls from Richard and 3 messages. "Matthew, where are you? Come back immediately." "I'm coming to get you. Tell me where you are." "Matthew, please, I'm worried." He turned off the phone. He didn't want to be tracked. He didn't want to go back. Not yet. Night had completely fallen when Matthew found himself entering a part of the city he didn't know. The streets were poorly lit, the buildings were older, and graffiti covered peeling walls. He was in the uptown area, a neighborhood known for its diverse cultural mix. The chair's battery was now blinking an alarming red. Without much thought, Matthew turned onto a side street, looking for an establishment where he could ask for help. That's when he heard it. "Hey, rich boy, you lost?" 3 young men approached, and Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. He had never been in a situation like this. At his private school, classmates could be cruel with veiled comments, but they never posed a physical threat. "Just passing through," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Passing through with that fancy chair. Must be worth a lot," commented the tallest of the 3, circling Matthew like a predator. "How about you lend it to us for a spin?" Matthew tried to back away, but the chair emitted a warning beep. The battery was almost dead. "Please, I just want to leave." "Oh, you'll leave, all right, but without the chair and that nice phone," said the second young man, holding out his hand. It was then that a strong, decisive female voice interrupted the scene. "What do you think you're doing with the boy?" A woman of about 60, with grey hair tied in a bun and an apron still tied around her waist, stood a few feet away. In her hands, she held what looked like a broom handle. "Stay out of this, Mrs. Zoe," one of the young men shouted. "I will not. This boy is in front of my restaurant. Get lost before I call Sergeant Wells. He's having dinner here tonight, you know." The mention of the police officer seemed to have an effect. The young men backed away, but not before casting threatening glares at Matthew. "You got lucky today, rich boy," the tallest one muttered, walking away with his cronies. The woman approached, her serious demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "Son, what are you doing out here all alone, and in that chair? Are you lost?" Matthew swallowed hard, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. I left home. I had a fight with my dad." Mrs. Zoe sighed, shaking her head. "And you ended up all the way in Uptown, huh? This is no place for a boy like you to be wandering alone at night. Come on, get inside. Let's charge this chair before it dies completely." The small Japanese restaurant was cozy, with only 5 tables and a counter. The smell of Asian spices filled the air, bringing a strange comfort to Matthew. On the wall, black and white photos seemed to tell the story of the place through the decades. "Sit over there in that corner," Mrs. Zoe instructed. "I'll find an outlet for that chair and bring you something to eat. You look like you haven't eaten in hours." Matthew obeyed, plugging the chair into an outlet near the wall. The only other customer, an elderly Japanese man who must have been over 80, watched the scene with quiet curiosity. "Here," Mrs. Zoe placed a bowl of steaming ramen in front of Matthew. "Eat it while it's hot." The comforting flavor of the broth was like a hug Matthew didn't know he needed. As he ate, he noticed Mrs. Zoe watching him attentively, as if assessing the situation. "Thank you," he mumbled between spoonfuls. "You saved my life." Mrs. Zoe gave a small smile. "Teenage drama, but I'm glad I could help. Now tell me, where did you run away from? Judging by the chair and your clothes, I bet you're not from around here." "I live in Lincoln Park with my dad." The woman's eyes widened. "Lincoln Park? Wow, you came a long way. And your mother?" Matthew lowered his eyes to his bowl. "She passed away 5 years ago, car accident." An understanding silence hung between them. Mrs. Zoe took a deep breath. "And why the fight with your father?" For some reason, perhaps due to exhaustion, hunger, or the unexpected kindness of this stranger, Matthew felt the emotional dam break. He told her about the letter, the writing program, the years of silence and resentment, about life in the gilded cage where everything worked perfectly, except for the hearts of the people who lived there. As he spoke, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He was truly being heard, without judgment, without interruptions, without attempts to fix what was broken. Just heard. "So that's it," he concluded, wiping away a stubborn tear. "I couldn't stay there anymore." Mrs. Zoe sighed, resting her wrinkled arms on the table. "You know, son, in my life, I've seen a lot of people run. From home, from problems, from themselves. But in the end, we always find that some things follow us wherever we go." A beep from the chair indicated that the battery was starting to charge, momentarily breaking the mood of the conversation. "Your father must be worried," the woman continued. "Don't you want to call him?" Matthew shook his head. "Not yet. He needs to understand that he can't control everything. That I have a voice." Mrs. Zoe smiled understandingly. "And you do, a strong one. I can see it in the way you talk, the way you write. But you know, sometimes parents need time to learn how to listen too, especially parents who have lost a lot." The restaurant door opened, and a cold night wind blew in along with a small, agile figure. A girl who couldn't have been more than 9, with curly hair tied in a messy ponytail, wearing worn but clean clothes. "Fee!" Mrs. Zoe exclaimed, a look of relief on her face. "I was getting worried. It's late." The girl smiled, revealing a missing front tooth, and approached the table. Her dark, lively and curious eyes immediately fixed on Matthew in his wheelchair. "Who's he?" she asked directly, with the raw sincerity of children. "A customer who needed help," Mrs. Zoe replied. "Matthew, this is Fiona, but everyone calls her Fi." The girl extended her hand with a comical formality for someone so small. "Nice to meet you. Why are you in a wheelchair?" "Fee," Mrs. Zoe scolded. "That's rude." Matthew smiled, shaking the small, calloused hand. There was something about her direct frankness that was strangely refreshing after years of people avoiding the subject. "It's okay," he said. "I had an accident when I was 10. I can't walk." Fee nodded, processing the information without drama. "Got it. And what are you doing here alone? Where are your parents?" "I ran away from home," Matthew answered with a frankness that surprised even himself. There was something about the girl's presence that made it impossible to lie or sugarcoat things. Fee's eyes widened, suddenly interested. "Like me?" "Fee!" Mrs. Zoe intervened again, placing a plate of food in front of the girl. "Eat first, talk later." Matthew watched as the girl devoured the ramen with a voracity that betrayed real hunger, not just the casual appetite he had felt. Fiona ate like someone who didn't know when her next meal would be, a foreign concept to someone who grew up with a constantly full refrigerator and a maid preparing 3 meals a day. "You ran away from home too?" Matthew asked when she finally paused to breathe. Fee shrugged as if discussing the weather. "It's been 3 years now, but Mrs. Zoe lets me sleep in the restaurant's storeroom when it's too cold or raining." 3 years. That meant she was only 6 when she started living on the streets. Matthew felt something tighten in his chest. His escape of a few hours seemed insignificant compared to the reality of this child. "Where are your parents?" Mrs. Zoe shot him a warning look, but Fee didn't seem bothered by the question. "My mum left. My dad—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "He drank until he got sick. A social worker came to get me, but I ran away from the shelter. It was worse there." The simplicity with which she narrated her personal tragedy left Matthew speechless. While he was living protected in his penthouse apartment, complaining about the silence and overprotection, this girl was fighting for survival every day. "And now you live alone?" Fee smiled, proud. "I have my spots. I know everyone here in Uptown. Mr. Tanaka gives me leftovers from the fish market. Mrs. Maria lets me use the bathroom at her shop. And there are the guys at the food truck who always save the day's leftovers for me." Matthew realized she had built her own safety net, creating bonds with local merchants, an impressive survival strategy for someone so young. "And the police, social workers. I know how to hide," she answered with a sly smile. "Nobody catches me if I don't want them to." Mrs. Zoe sighed, pouring tea for the 3 of them. "I've tried to convince this girl to accept help, to go to a foster family, but she's as stubborn as a mule." "I don't trust adults," Fee declared, taking a sip of tea. "No offense, Mrs. Z." "What about me?" Matthew asked, surprising himself with his own boldness. "Do you trust me?" Fee studied him with her sharp eyes. You're not an adult yet, and you're in a wheelchair. You couldn't hurt me even if you wanted to." The girl's cutting sincerity drew a genuine laugh from Matthew, the first in a long time. Fair enough. Outside, the night wore on. The last customer had left, and Mrs. Zoe began to clean the tables, preparing to close the restaurant. "So now what, Matthew? What are you going to do?" the woman asked while sweeping the floor. "Your chair is almost fully charged." Reality hit him like a bucket of cold water. In his impulsive escape, he hadn't planned anything beyond leaving the house. He had nowhere to go, not enough money, and the city at night was far more dangerous than he had imagined. I don't know," he admitted, ashamed. Fee, who was now licking a small bowl of ice cream that Mrs. Zoe had offered her for dessert, looked up with interest. "You can stay at my hideout," she offered, surprising both Matthew and Mrs. Zoe. "There's room for the chair. It's under the awning of the old bookstore 3 blocks from here. Nobody bothers me there because the building owner lets me stay." "Fee!" Mrs. Zoe seemed scandalized. "The boy can't sleep on the street. He has a home, a family." "But he ran away," Fee argued, as if that explained everything. Matthew felt torn between laughter and tears at the childish, yet undeniably true, logic. "Look, Matthew." Mrs. Zoe sat down in front of him, her face marked by worried wrinkles. "I understand you're hurt by your father. I really do. But the streets of Chicago are no place for a boy like you, especially a cripple, is that it?" Matthew interrupted, the frustration returning. "Everyone thinks they know what's best for me. Everyone thinks I can't manage on my own." "That's not it, son. It's just that he can stay with me," Fee insisted. "I'll take care of him." The declaration, coming from a 9-year-old street kid, should have sounded absurd, but there was so much conviction in that small voice that even Mrs. Zoe hesitated. "See, even she thinks I need protection," Matthew muttered. Fee rolled her eyes. "Everyone needs protection, silly, even me. The difference is I know the dangers and you don't. You have the fancy chair, but you don't know where the potholes are, where the punks hang out, which cops are cool and which ones aren't." The girl's astuteness left him momentarily speechless. "She's right," Mrs. Zoe agreed, sighing. "You don't know the real city, Matthew, not the way she does." The pride in Fee's eyes was evident. She sat up straighter in her chair, savoring the recognition of her expertise. "If you really want to stay out of the house tonight, I can set up a mattress for you here in the restaurant," Mrs. Zoe offered. "But first thing tomorrow, you call your father, deal?" Before Matthew could answer, his cell phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen, along with a photo of the two of them in a rare happy moment, during a trip to Key West 3 years ago. Fee peeked at the screen. "Is that your dad?" Matthew nodded, letting the phone ring. "Why don't you answer?" the girl asked, curious. "Because he'll make me go home." "And is it so bad there?" Fee tilted her head, genuinely confused. "Do you have food? A bed? A hot shower?" "I have all of that." "So what's the problem?" The simple question hit Matthew like a punch. How could he explain to a child who lived on the streets that his prison was made of luxury and overprotection? How could he justify his escape when compared to her brutal reality? "The problem is," he searched for the right words, "my dad doesn't listen to me. He doesn't really see me. Since the accident, he treats me like I'm made of glass, like I can't do anything on my own." Fee considered, licking the last of the ice cream from her spoon. "Sounds annoying. But at least he cares, right? Mine didn't even care if I ate or not." Again, the raw simplicity of the observation left Matthew without a response. The phone stopped ringing, only to start again seconds later. This time it was Mr. Evans, the doorman. "I think your dad is already looking for you," Mrs. Zoe commented. "He must be desperate by now." Matthew hesitated, his finger hovering over the answer button. Part of him wanted to continue his escape, to prove he could survive on his own. Another part was beginning to recognize the foolishness of his impulsive action. "If you don't want to talk to him, I will," Mrs. Zoe offered. "I'll tell him you're safe, that you can spend the night here, and you two can talk calmly tomorrow." Before he could decide, the restaurant door burst open. A tall man in a wrinkled suit and with a tormented expression stormed into the room. Richard Foster looked like he had aged 10 years in a few hours. "Matthew!" he exclaimed upon seeing his son, a mixture of relief and fury in his voice. "Thank God!" Matthew felt his heart race. How did you find me? The GPS on your phone, Richard answered, approaching. Do you have any idea how much you scared me? The danger you were in? I've already called the police, the hospitals. I was about to alert the media. Fee, instantly alert like a wild animal facing a predator, retreated behind Mrs. Zoe. The mention of the police was all she needed to hear to trigger her flight instinct. Calm down, sir, Mrs. Zoe intervened, placing herself between father and son. Your boy is fine. He's eaten, rested. The chair is almost charged. There's no need for all this drama. Richard seemed to notice the woman for the first time. And you are Zoe Tanaka, the owner of this restaurant. Your son was in trouble outside. Some thugs were trying to steal his chair. I brought him inside. Richard's face paled upon hearing about the danger Matthew had faced. My God, Thank you, ma'am. I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by not yelling at your son, she replied bluntly. At least not in my establishment. Matthew watched, astonished, as the small Japanese woman stood up to his father, the powerful Richard Foster, who made executives tremble in meetings, as if he were just another unruly customer. Richard took a deep breath, visibly trying to control himself. Then, to Matthew's surprise, he knelt beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to his son's eye level. Are you okay? He asked, his voice now softer, almost breaking. Did they hurt you? I'm fine, Dad, Matthew murmured, unsettled by his father's public display of vulnerability. Mrs. Zoe saved me, and Fee helped me too. Fee? Matthew turned, looking for the girl, but she had disappeared. Where did she go? He asked Mrs. Zoe. The woman sighed. Probably slipped out the back when she saw your father come in. She has issues with authorities. Richard frowned, confused. Who is this girl? A street kid, Mrs. Zoe explained, starting to clear the bowls from the table. She's been living on her own since she was 6, knows every corner of Uptown like the back of her hand. 6? Richard looked horrified. And nobody does anything? A lot of people have tried to help, but she runs from institutions. She's afraid of being taken far away from here, from the little security she's built. So we in the community look after her as we can. A little food here, a place to sleep there when it's really cold. Matthew watched his father's expression change, something like understanding crossing his gaze. Is she the one your son was talking about? The one who helped him? Mrs. Zoe nodded. Fee has a huge heart. Despite everything she's been through, she saw your son in trouble and wanted to help, even offered him her apartment for the night. A small smile appeared at the corner of Richard's mouth, the first Matthew had seen in days. Apartment? The place where she sleeps. Under the awning of an abandoned bookstore, 3 blocks from here. The smile vanished, replaced by a somber expression. Matthew knew that look. His father was processing information, connecting dots, probably thinking of some practical solution to a complex problem, as he always did. I want to thank her, Richard said, standing up. You and the girl. You helped my son when I couldn't. How much do I owe you for dinner, and can I leave something for the girl? Mrs. Zoe shook her head. You don't need to pay for anything. It was a pleasure to meet your son. He's a good boy, polite, smart. As for Fee, she doesn't accept handouts. She's very proud, but if you really want to help, the restaurant is open every day except Mondays. She always shows up for dinner. Richard nodded, thoughtful. Then he turned to Matthew. Let's go home? The driver is waiting outside. Matthew hesitated. Part of him still resisted, still wanted to prove his point. But his encounter with Fee had put many things into perspective. Only if we really talk when we get there, he proposed firmly. No yelling, no accusations, just talk. To his surprise, Richard agreed immediately. I promise. We have a lot to talk about. As Matthew unplugged his chair from the outlet, thanking Mrs. Zoe again, he couldn't help but look toward the back door, wondering where Fee had gone. There was something about that girl, a strength, a resilience, a street-smart wisdom, that intrigued him deeply. Can we come back tomorrow? He asked Richard as they left the restaurant. I want to see Fee again, to thank her properly. Richard looked at his son, a strange expression on his face, as if he were seeing Matthew for the first time in a long time. Of course we can, he replied, helping him into the adapted van where the driver was waiting. We'll come back tomorrow. As the vehicle pulled away from the uptown neighborhood, heading through the Chicago night toward the safety of Lincoln Park, Matthew couldn't help but think about the contrast between his life and fees. The girl who had nothing had shown him in just a few hours how much he had to be grateful for, and perhaps more importantly, how much he still had to learn about the true meaning of freedom, courage, and resilience. In the darkness of the van, he felt Richard's hand rest hesitantly on his shoulder, a simple gesture of connection that hadn't happened in years. And for the first time, Matthew didn't pull away. The drive back to Lincoln Park was spent in a thick but different kind of silence. It wasn't the cold, distant silence that usually hung between Matthew and Richard, but one heavy with unsaid words, raw emotions and thoughts seeking order before being expressed. Matthew watched the lights of Chicago from the van window, reflecting on how the city looked completely different depending on the angle from which it was viewed. From the top of his penthouse, problems seemed distant, small, almost abstract. On the streets of Uptown, every broken sidewalk, every indifferent glance, every obstacle became a palpable and challenging reality. Beside him, Richard kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was clearly wandering through long-avoided emotional territories. From time to time, he cast furtive glances at his son, as if making sure he was really there, safe, within reach. When they finally arrived at the Elysian Towers, Mr. Evans greeted them with evident relief. "Thank God! Matthew! I was so worried when your father came back without you." "Sorry, Mr. Evans," the boy murmured, genuinely sorry for having worried the kind doorman. In the private elevator that led directly to the penthouse, Richard finally broke the silence. "I've never been so scared in my life as I was today," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "Not even during the accident." The direct mention of the accident, something Richard religiously avoided, caught Matthew by surprise. He looked up, meeting his father's gaze. "We never talk about it," Matthew said, stating the obvious. "No," Richard agreed. I couldn't." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse living room. The apartment was exactly as Matthew had left it hours before. The coffee table still held the breakfast mugs. The envelope from the writing program lay open on the sofa. It was as if time had frozen at the moment of his escape. "Are you hungry?" Richard asked, unsure how to begin the promised conversation. "No, I ate at Mrs. Zoe's restaurant," Matthew replied, maneuvering his chair into the room. "Her ramen is incredible." A small smile appeared on Richard's tired face. "I've never seen you eat Japanese food other than sushi." "I didn't know I liked ramen either," Matthew admitted. It was a simple statement, but laden with meaning. How many other things did he not know about himself because he'd never had the chance to try them? Richard walked to the automated kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water. His movements were mechanical, as if trying to buy time to order his thoughts. "Do you want to talk here or in your room?" he finally asked. "Here is fine," Matthew replied, stopping his chair near the large modular sofa that dominated the room. Richard sat across from him, placing the bottle on the table. For a few moments they both sat there, immersed in silence once again. "I read your essay," Richard began, pointing to the envelope. "I read it again after you left, and once more while I was looking for you." Matthew felt his heart race. The last time they had discussed the essay, the conversation had exploded into accusations and hurt feelings. "And?" "It's very good, Matthew. Very honest. Painfully honest." Richard paused, searching for the right words. "You have a talent for writing. You always have, since you were little." This was not what Matthew expected to hear. "You're not angry about what I wrote? About you? About us?" Richard sighed deeply. "I'm hurt, but not angry. Not anymore. I think I needed to read that. I needed to see how you really feel." The silence returned, but this time it was Matthew who broke it. "You said the accident was your fault. Why?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Richard's eyes welled up, and he looked away toward the window, where the city lights blinked, indifferent to the personal tragedies unfolding among its skyscrapers. "That day at the pool," he began, his voice low and tense. "Your mother didn't want you to jump from the high dive. She thought it was dangerous. But I insisted. I said you were old enough, that you needed to learn to face challenges." Matthew felt a shiver run down his spine. For 5 years he had imagined the accident was just that, an accident, with no one to blame. The revelation that there had been a parental dispute behind that fateful afternoon was unsettling. "Claire and I argued by the poolside," Richard continued, now staring at his own hands. She said I was pushing you too hard, as always. I argued that she overprotected you, that you'd never develop independence that way. The irony was not lost on Matthew. After the accident, Richard had become the very thing he had criticized in his mother, overprotective to the extreme. When you climbed up to the diving board, I made a point of shouting, "Go on, son, show your mum you can do it." Richard covered his face with his hands. You looked down, you hesitated. Claire started asking you to come down, and I pushed. I made that disappointed face that I know you always hated. And you jumped. Matthew closed his eyes. The memories of that day were hazy. He remembered the fear as he looked at the water so far below, the sound of his parents' voices, but not the exact words. And then only flashes. The wrong impact with the water, the searing pain, the panic, the ambulance lights. It wasn't an accident, Matthew. It was my arrogance, my stupid pride, my need to prove that my son could be brave, be a winner. And the result, Richard gestured toward the wheelchair, unable to complete the sentence. And Mom, what did she say afterward? Richard's expression transformed into a mask of absolute pain. She never forgave me. She never said it. She was too polite for that. But I saw it in her eyes. The blame, the judgment. When she left us in the car crash 2 months later, part of me believed it was some kind of cosmic justice, a punishment. Matthew absorbed the impact of that confession. It was so much information, so much pain pent up for years, that he could barely process it all. He had always thought his father's silence about the accident was indifference or shame of him, Matthew. He had never considered it could be guilt and self-punishment. After Claire was gone, I swore that nothing else would happen to you, Richard continued, discreetly wiping away a tear. That I would protect you from everything, that I would make up for my mistake. I hired the best doctors, therapists, adapted the entire apartment, researched assistive technologies from around the world, but never, not once, did I ask what you really wanted or needed. The words hit Matthew like waves, bringing a new understanding of the last 5 years. What he had interpreted as coldness was, in fact, a desperate attempt at redemption. Why did you never tell me this before? Richard shook his head. Because I'm a coward. Because I was afraid you would hate me, just as I hate myself for my part in all of this. Because I thought that if we didn't talk about it, maybe the pain would be less. But it wasn't, Matthew observed. No, Richard agreed. The silence only widened the chasm between us. Matthew looked at the envelope from the writing program, thinking about how his essay had been a cry against that very silence. I didn't want to humiliate you with the essay, he said softly. I just wanted to be heard, to be seen as I am now, not as a broken memory of what I was before. I know, Richard replied, and you have every right to participate in this program. In fact, I'm proud you were selected. There must have been a lot of competition. 300 applicants for 30 spots, Matthew confirmed, a hint of pride in his voice. Impressive. Richard smiled, a genuine smile, not the tense expression that had become his default in recent years. When does it start? In 2 weeks. The meetings are on Saturdays at the Harold Washington Library Center. Downtown, but how will you... Richard stopped himself, realizing he was slipping back into overprotective mode. Sorry, we can figure out the logistics later. Matthew smiled, appreciating his father's effort. I met a girl today, he said, changing the subject. Fee. Richard's expression softened. The street kid. Yeah, she's only 9 years old, Dad. And she's been living on her own since she was 6, on the streets, and even so, she wanted to protect me. She wanted to share her apartment with me. Matthew made air quotes when he said, apartment. That lady, Mrs. Zoe, told me a little about her. She sounds like an extraordinary child. She is, Matthew agreed, excited to share his admiration for the girl. She knows everyone in the neighborhood, knows exactly where to get food, where it's safe to sleep. She's created a kind of family with the local shopkeepers, and even living like that, she smiles, Dad. She has this genuine laugh, with her front tooth missing. Richard listened attentively, surprised by his son's enthusiasm when talking about the girl. You know what she asked me when she found out I'd run away from home? Matthew continued. If I had food, a bed, and a hot shower, and when I said yes, she was genuinely confused about why I would run away. An understanding smile appeared on Richard's tired face. And what did you tell her? That I wasn't being listened to, that I wasn't really being seen. Matthew paused, but after spending a few hours with her, I started to feel selfish. My problem seems so small compared to hers. Pain isn't a competition, son, Richard said, surprising Matthew with his unexpected sensitivity. The fact that there are children like Fee, facing unimaginable hardships, doesn't make your feelings any less valid. Matthew nodded, thoughtful. But I understand what you mean, Richard continued. Meeting someone like her puts things in perspective. It makes us rethink our priorities. Exactly, Matthew exclaimed, moved at being understood. And you know what's most impressive? She has no self-pity. She doesn't complain. She just keeps going. She adapts. She finds solutions. Sounds like someone I know, Richard commented, looking meaningfully at his son. Matthew blushed slightly at the implicit compliment. For years, he had seen himself mainly through the lens of disability, of what he couldn't do, of what he had lost. The comparison to Fee's resilience was surprisingly comforting. I want to go back there tomorrow, he said, determined. I want to see her again. Thank her properly. Richard nodded. We will. I'd also like to thank her and Mrs. Zoe properly. A comfortable silence settled between them, until Richard stood up from the sofa. It's late. You must be exhausted after everything you've been through today. Matthew nodded, suddenly aware of the fatigue weighing on his shoulders. I'll go to my room then. Good night, Dad. As he was heading down the hall, Richard's voice stopped him. Matthew, thank you. The boy turned his chair, confused. For what? For coming back, for being willing to talk, for giving me a second chance. The sincerity in his father's voice, the exposed vulnerability, touched Matthew deeply. We're just getting started, Dad, he replied with a small smile. We still have a lot to talk about. I know, Richard agreed, and I promise I'm going to try, really. Later, lying in his bed, Matthew reflected on the whirlwind of emotions and discoveries of that day. The impulsive escape, the dangers of the city, the meeting with Fee and Mrs. Zoe, the sincere conversation with his father, each event like a piece of a puzzle that was slowly beginning to form a clearer picture. He picked up his phone and reread the essay he had sent to the writing program. The words about invisibility, about physical and emotional barriers, about the suffocating silence still rang true, but now there was room for new words, words about unexpected encounters, about bridges beginning to be built, about dialogues that finally seemed possible. On the other side of the apartment, Richard was also awake, sitting at his office desk, his laptop open in front of him. On the screen, a search for homeless children in Chicago and shelter programs. As he read alarming statistics and reports on social projects, an idea began to form in his mind, an idea that, unbeknownst to him yet, would change not only Fee's life, but also his own and Matthew's. Outside the window, Chicago continued its uninterrupted urban symphony of lights, sounds, and lives, intertwined by chances that, seen up close, revealed themselves to be much more than mere coincidences. The next morning brought a strange atmosphere to the Foster apartment, as if the air were lighter, as if the modern cold walls had somehow absorbed a little more human warmth. Matthew woke to the soft sound of rain against the window and the unusual smell of fresh coffee and toast. When he reached the kitchen in his wheelchair, he found Richard making breakfast, a scene so rare that Matthew had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Normally it was Maria, the maid, who took care of it, or meals were delivered by some food app. Good morning, Richard said, turning with a spatula in his hand. I'm trying to make eggs like your mother used to. I don't think I'm having much success. The casual comment about Claire, without the usual tension that accompanied any mention of his late wife, was another novelty. You were never very good in the kitchen, Matthew commented, approaching the table already set for two. Richard smiled. You wouldn't know that. Before I used to cook on weekends when you were little. Your mother said I turned the kitchen into a war zone. It was strange and comforting, this new territory of light conversations about the past. As if a door locked for years was being cautiously reopened. I gave Maria the day off, Richard continued, placing the slightly burnt eggs on 2 plates. I thought we could, I don't know, have a different kind of day. Matthew nodded, watching his father with curiosity. Richard seemed simultaneously exhausted and energized, like someone who had stayed up all night but found a new purpose. Did you sleep? Matthew asked. Not much, Richard admitted, sitting at the table. I was thinking about yesterday, about you, about Fee. Matthew felt a pang of anxiety. And I made some decisions, Richard hesitated, searching for the right words. First, about the writing program. Not only are you going to participate, but I'd like to be more present. Maybe take you to the sessions, if you don't mind. Matthew raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Really? If you want, of course. I understand if you'd prefer to go alone, with the driver. No, I think that would be nice, Matthew replied, trying not to show how moved he was by the simple suggestion. Richard smiled, relieved. Good. And, second, I spent the night researching homeless children, specifically about Fee. What do you mean? Chicago has about 2,000 children living on the streets, Matthew. 2,000. And the shelters, the institutions, many have serious problems. Overcrowding, abuse, neglect. It's no wonder many children like Fee prefer the streets. Matthew agreed, remembering the girl's comment about running away from the shelter. I talked to some contacts overnight, lawyers, social workers I know through the company's social responsibility initiatives, and, well, I'm considering some possibilities. What kind of possibilities? Matthew asked, curious. Richard hesitated. It's still too early to say. First, we need to go back to Mrs. Zoe's restaurant, get to know Fee's situation better. Are you willing to go today? Of course. Can we go now? Richard smiled at his son's enthusiasm. Let's finish breakfast first, and we need to wait for lunch. Mrs. Zoe said the restaurant only opens at 11:30 a.m., and we don't know what time Fee usually shows up. Matthew nodded, attacking the burnt eggs with an appetite that surprised them both. There was something different in the air, a positive expectation that neither of them had experienced in a long time. At 1 p.m., the adapted van parked on the small uptown street where the Tanaka restaurant was located. The morning rain had given way to a timid sun struggling to appear between scattered clouds. Mrs. Zoe greeted them with a warm smile, as if they were regular customers and not strangers who had dramatically entered her life the night before. You came back. Come in, come in. The lunch rush is almost over. We have tables available. The small restaurant was fuller than the previous night. A few executives from nearby companies shared tables with students from the University of Chicago, all enjoying the authentic homemade food that had made Tanaka's famous in the neighborhood. Has Fee shown up today? Matthew asked anxiously as they maneuvered to a corner table. Mrs. Zoe shook her head. Not yet. She rarely comes at lunchtime. She usually shows up late in the afternoon for dinner. Matthew couldn't hide his disappointment. Richard, noticing, intervened. We can have lunch and come back later. What do you think, son? Let's stay, Matthew decided. The food is great, and who knows, maybe she'll show up. Mrs. Zoe smiled, appreciating the compliment. I'll bring the menu. Did you enjoy the ramen yesterday? Very much, Matthew answered sincerely. While they ate, Richard and Mrs. Zoe talked about the history of the restaurant, founded by her parents almost 50 years ago, when Japanese immigration still shaped the predominant character of parts of Chicago. Matthew watched the interaction with interest, noticing how his father, usually so formal and distant in settings outside his business circle, seemed genuinely engaged in the conversation. And how did you meet Fee? Richard asked, after they finished their meal and moved on to green tea. Mrs. Zoe sighed, looking out the restaurant window at the bustling street. She showed up here about 2.5 years ago. She was just a wisp of a thing, dirty, as wary as a stray cat. She tried to take food from the trash out back. I found her, and instead of shooing her away, I offered her a hot plate. Matthew pictured the scene, the tiny, hungry girl facing the old woman with those big, determined eyes. At first, she would come, eat, and run off. She wouldn't even give me time to talk properly. Over the months, she started to trust a little more, to sit down and eat properly. To talk. Did she ever talk about her family? Richard inquired. Little by little, yes. The father was an alcoholic, abusive. The mother ran off when she was about 4. The father ended up being taken to the hospital with cirrhosis when she was 6, and she was sent to a city shelter. That's where she ran away from, and no one looked for her. The police, social services. The indignation in Richard's voice was evident. Mrs. Zoe gave a sad smile. At first, yes. But Chicago has thousands of missing children, Mr. Foster. Resources are limited, the cases are many. And Fee, she's smart. She knows how to hide. She can spot a squad car or a social worker from a mile away. This is unacceptable, Richard muttered, the problem-solving executive in him emerging. A 9-year-old child on the streets. I agree, Mrs. Zoe replied. But the situation is complex. I've tried to convince her to accept help. I offered to let her stay in the back room permanently. But she's scared. Scared of getting attached and being abandoned again. Scared of trusting and being disappointed. Richard nodded, thoughtful. Matthew recognized that expression. His father was formulating a plan. The afternoon wore on, and they remained at the restaurant talking with Mrs. Zoe in between her dealings with the few customers who came in. Richard asked many questions about Fee, her habits, her preferences, the places she frequented. Matthew noticed his father discreetly taking notes on his phone. At 5 p.m., as the sun began to set again, the restaurant door opened, and Fee blew in like a whirlwind. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Matthew and Richard, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "You came back," she stated, approaching cautiously. "I said we would," Matthew replied, smiling. "I wanted to thank you properly for yesterday." Fee relaxed a little, a small smile forming on her freckled face. "No need to thank me. You would have done the same." Richard watched the interaction, impressed by the maturity and dignity of the small street girl. "Hi, Fee," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Foster, Matthew's dad. I also wanted to thank you for helping my son yesterday." Fee hesitated before shaking the offered hand, sizing Richard up with eyes that seemed much older than her 9 years. "Is he okay? Did he go home?" "Yes, thanks to you and Mrs. Zoe." Fee nodded, satisfied, and then turned to the restaurant owner. "Any leftover tempura today, Mrs. Z?" "No leftovers, but I can fry some fresh for you," the woman replied, winking. "Go wash your hands first." Obediently, Fee headed to the small bathroom in the back. When she returned, Matthew noticed she had tried to fix her hair and clean her face better, a small gesture of vanity that made her even more endearing. "Are you guys having tempura too?" she asked, sitting at the table with them. "We already had lunch," Matthew replied, "but we waited for you all afternoon." Fee seemed genuinely surprised. "Why?" "I told you I wanted to thank you," Matthew said. "And also, I wanted to get to know you better." The girl's natural suspicion gave way to curiosity. "Get to know me better? Why?" "Because you were nice to me yesterday. Because you were going to let me stay in your apartment." Matthew made the same air quote gesture he had with his father the night before. "And because, I don't know, you seem like an interesting person." Fee let out a laugh, that pure laugh with the missing front tooth that had charmed Matthew. "You're weird," she declared without malice. "Yeah, I know," Matthew smiled. "But so are you." "Fee," Richard intervened gently, "Matthew told me you've been living on your own for a long time. Is that true?" The girl immediately clammed up, her expression turning cautious. "Why? I'm just trying to understand better," Richard replied, sensing the shift. "I'm not going to call any authorities if that's what you're worried about." Fee studied Richard's face for a few moments, as if trying to detect a lie. 3 years, she finally answered. "More or less. And you manage okay?" The genuine concern in Richard's voice was evident. Fee shrugged. "I have my spots. I know how to take care of myself." "I'm sure you do," Richard agreed. "You seem very smart and brave." The sincere compliment made Fee blush slightly. Mrs. Zoe brought a fresh portion of tempura, and the girl's eyes lit up with satisfaction. Richard watched how she ate with a mix of veracity and self-control, clearly used to rationing her resources. "Fee," Matthew said after she finished eating, "I had an idea. How about you come see our house, just to visit?" The proposal caught both Fee and Richard by surprise. The girl frowned, confused. "What for?" "Because—" Matthew searched for the right words. "Because you helped me yesterday, and I wanted to repay you somehow. We can watch a movie, eat popcorn." I don't know what normal people do. Fee looked at Matthew, at Richard, and then at Mrs. Zoe as if seeking guidance. "That's a good idea, Fee," the woman encouraged. "You never leave the neighborhood. It would be a different experience." "I don't need charity," the girl declared, lifting her chin. "It's not charity," Matthew replied quickly. "It's gratitude and friendship. You said yesterday you trusted me because I'm not an adult and I'm in a wheelchair, remember? So there's no danger." The childish logic seemed to work. Fee considered it for a few moments. "Just a visit? And then you'll bring me back?" "Promise," Richard guaranteed, joining the conversation. "Or better yet, You decide when you want to come back, and I'll bring you personally." After a few more minutes of internal deliberation, Fee finally nodded. "Okay, but just for a little while." The small victory was celebrated with smiles. Matthew felt strangely nervous, as if he were inviting a friend over for the first time, which in a way was true. He hadn't had any real friends since the accident. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Zoe pulled Fee aside, whispering something in her ear. The girl nodded seriously and then ran to the bathroom again. She returned minutes later with her face and hands impeccably clean, her hair a little more tamed. "I'm ready," she announced, with a dignity that moved Richard. During the ride in the adapted van, Fee kept her nose pressed to the window, absorbing every detail of the city she rarely saw outside her familiar neighborhood. Her eyes widened at every taller building, every more luxurious storefront as they approached Lincoln Park. "You guys live in a fancy place," she commented, when they finally entered the Elysian Towers. "My dad's a bit over the top," Matthew replied, exchanging a knowing look with Richard, who smiled back. When the elevator opened directly into the penthouse, Fee was momentarily paralyzed. Her eyes scanned the immense open space, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the designer furniture, the technology embedded in every corner. "This isn't a house," she finally declared. "It's a shopping mall." Matthew laughed, genuinely amused by the sharp observation. "Sometimes it feels like one." Richard showed the small visitor the main rooms, the living room, the automated kitchen, the game room that Matthew rarely used. Fee followed in silence, timidly touching the surfaces as if afraid she might break them. "Want to see my room?" Matthew invited. Matthew's room was a mix of high-tech and normal teenage life, latest generation computers next to band posters, adaptive equipment sharing space with books and manga. "You like to read," Fee observed, approaching the bookshelf. "Me too." "Really? What do you read?" Matthew asked, surprised. "Whatever I can find. There's a lady at the newsstand who lets me look through magazines, and one time I found a book in a school's trash. Harry Potter. I've read it like 10 times. The casual comment about finding books in the trash hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. He looked at his overflowing bookshelf, many of the books not even opened, bought by Richard in the hope of encouraging him to read. "You can borrow whatever you want," he offered impulsively. "I have the complete Harry Potter series." Fee's eyes sparkled, but she quickly controlled her expression. "You don't have to." "I want to lend them, really. It's not charity, it's sharing. Friends do that." The word friends hung in the air between them, laden with meaning for two children who were lonely for completely different reasons. "Okay," Fee finally agreed, a small smile forming, "but just one at a time, and I'll give it back." "Deal." Richard watched the interaction from the doorway, a lump in his throat. There was something powerfully moving about the unlikely connection between his wheelchair-bound son and this street girl. Two young people life had forced to grow up too soon, each in their own way. "How about a snack?" he suggested, breaking the moment. "We can order pizza, watch a movie." The evening progressed with surprising naturalness. Sitting in the home theater room, Fee, Matthew, and Richard shared pizza and laughter, watching an adventure comedy. For someone who had lived on the streets for the last few years, Fee displayed remarkable manners, thanking for every kindness, using napkins, trying to follow the social norms she observed. When the movie ended, it was already past 9 o'clock. Fee glanced anxiously at the clock on the wall. "I need to go back," she announced. "Mrs. Zoe will be worried." Richard hesitated, exchanging a look with Matthew. "Fee, it's very late for a girl to be out, even with an adult. What do you think about sleeping here tonight, and we'll take you back first thing in the morning?" The girl's eyes widened in alarm. "Sleep here?" "We have a guest room," Richard continued gently, "with its own bathroom. You can lock the door if you want, and I promise that first thing tomorrow we'll take you back." Fee seemed to be fighting an internal battle, the obvious comfort of the penthouse versus the cold awning where she usually slept, safety versus the dangers of the night, but also the fear of the unknown, of dependency. "Mrs. Zoe will be worried," she repeated, uncertain. "We can call her," Matthew suggested. "We have the restaurant's number." The call to Mrs. Zoe was short but decisive. The woman not only approved of the idea, but seemed relieved to know Fee would be spending the night in a safe place. "Okay," the girl finally agreed, "but just for tonight." Richard and Matthew exchanged complicit glances. It was a first step. While Richard prepared the guest room, Matthew showed Fee the huge master bathroom, with its jacuzzi tub and multi-jet shower. "Do you want to take a bath?" he asked. "There are clean towels, soap, shampoo." The look of pure wonder on Fee's face was answer enough. For a child who washed up in public restrooms or in Mrs. Zoe's restaurant sink, the idea of a hot private bath was an unimaginable luxury. "Can I really?" she asked, timidly touching the edge of the tub. "Of course," Matthew replied, smiling. "Make yourself at home. I'll ask my dad to find some clothes for you to sleep in. He should have a t-shirt that will work as a nightgown." When he left Fee in the bathroom, already fascinated by the various faucets and controls of the tub, Matthew found Richard in the hallway, his face marked by a thoughtful expression. "The room is ready," his father informed him. "I put one of my clean t-shirts out for her to use as pajamas. It'll be huge, but it's better than nothing." "Thanks, Dad." Richard hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more. "You like her, don't you?" he finally asked. "Fee." "Yeah," Matthew admitted. "She's different, honest. She doesn't have that pitying look everyone else gives me. And she's so strong, Dad. So brave." Richard nodded, understanding. "She really is extraordinary." He paused. "Matthew, would you mind if I tried to help her? For real?" "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking. There are so many children like Fee. But now we know her. Not just a statistic, but a real person. And maybe we can make a difference, at least for one of them." Matthew felt his heart race. "What are you thinking of doing?" "I'm not sure yet," Richard admitted. "I'm talking to lawyers, social workers. There are legal processes, bureaucracy. But if she wants it, if she trusts us..." "Are you thinking of adopting her?" The disbelief in Matthew's voice was palpable. "I don't know if a formal adoption would be possible right away. There's the process of searching for the biological family, evaluations, adaptation periods. But provisional custody, maybe. A temporary home that could become permanent if she adapted, if she wanted to." Matthew fell silent, absorbing the magnitude of the idea. His father, always so practical, so focused on immediate results, was considering such a profound commitment to a child he had known for less than 24 hours. "Are you serious?" he finally asked. Richard knelt beside Matthew's chair, bringing himself to his son's eye level. "Very serious, but only if you want it too. It would be a huge change for our family." "Family," Matthew repeated, the word sounding strange after years of it being just him and his father, coexisting more than living together. "It would be nice to have a real family again." Richard smiled, his eyes welling up. "Then let's take it slow. Get to know Fee better. Earn her trust. See if she'd be comfortable with the idea. And follow the legal procedures, of course. She'll never agree if she thinks it's charity," Matthew observed, knowing the girl's pride. "It's not charity," Richard replied with conviction. "It's reciprocity. She helped us find something we lost a long time ago, son. Maybe we can help her find something she's never had." In the bathroom, Fee hummed quietly as she marveled at the hot, fragrant water in the tub, oblivious to the conversation that could forever change the course of her life. 3 floors below, in the penthouse office, Richard's laptop displayed forms for temporary guardianship, foster care, and the first steps toward a possible adoption. And in the hallway between them, Matthew smiled to himself, feeling for the first time in years that forgotten sense of positive expectation, that tomorrow could be not just different, but better than today. 4 months later, the auditorium at the Harold Washington Library Center was packed for the closing ceremony of the National Young Writers Program, Special Triumph Edition. Matthew waited backstage, nervously adjusting the navy blue shirt that Fee had insisted he wear. "It matches your eyes," she had said, with the comical seriousness of someone who had just discovered fashion magazines. "Nervous?" Richard's voice broke his thoughts. "A little. What if I forget the text? What if the chair gets stuck in the middle of the stage?" Richard smiled. "You'll do great. You know your text by heart, and the chair's battery is fully charged. I checked it myself 3 times. In the front rows of the audience, Fee waited anxiously, wearing the new dress she had picked out herself on a trip to the mall, an experience that had almost sent her into shock. The last few months had been transformative. Fee's first week in the penthouse was marked by a mix of wonder and mistrust. Richard had started the legal process for provisional custody, while a search of family records confirmed her father had passed away, and her mother had left no trace. There were difficult days, of course, days when Fee would wake up startled, certain that everything would be taken from her again. But there was also unexpected laughter at the dinner table, now always occupied by the three of them. There was the first time Fee called the apartment home, without hesitating, and the look in Richard's eyes when it happened. When the host announced his name, Matthew took a deep breath and guided his chair onto the stage. The spotlight was intense, but he could make out Fee practically bouncing in her seat, and Richard beside her, with an expression of restrained pride. "Good evening," Matthew began. "My name is Matthew Foster. I'm 15 years old, and I'm going to share my piece, the day I ran away from home and found my way back. 4 months ago, I ran away from home. It was an impulsive decision, born from years of silence and resentment. I was trapped in a gilded cage, a penthouse apartment with everything money could buy, except understanding. I roamed the streets of Chicago for the first time alone. I, who had always lived protected, suddenly found myself facing broken sidewalks, indifferent stares, and the harsh reality of a city not made for people like me. That's when I met Mrs. Zoe, a Japanese-American woman who owns a small restaurant in Uptown, and Fee, a 9-year-old girl living on the street since she was 6, who taught me the true meaning of courage and resilience. That night, when I returned home with my father, something had changed. The silence began to be broken, painful truths began to be spoken, and most importantly, we began to truly listen to each other. Today, 4 months later, we are learning to be a family, not a perfect one nor a conventional one, but a real family built on the daily choice to be present, to listen, to embrace. Fee now goes to school, has her own room, and is slowly learning to trust that some good things can last. My father, a die-hard workaholic, now makes a point of having dinner with us every night, and I am relearning how to connect with the world. People ask how we formed this bond with someone so different. The answer is simple. We both knew invisibility. I becoming invisible after my accident, reduced to my physical condition. Fee invisible due to her social condition, just another child lost on the streets of an indifferent metropolis. In the meeting of the invisible, we discovered we could truly see each other, and in seeing each other, we began to see the world again. Fee taught me that freedom isn't about running away, but about facing problems with courage. My father taught me that it's possible to start over, and I hope I've taught them both that our limitations do not define who we can become. The day I ran away from home, I was seeking to be heard, to be seen. Ironically, it was only by getting lost that I found my way back, not to the penthouse in Lincoln Park, but to the true meaning of home, the space where we are accepted as we are. Sometimes the person who saves your life isn't who you expected. Sometimes salvation comes in the hands of a child who, despite having nothing, teaches you everything about compassion and humanity. And sometimes the path home is longer than we imagine, passing through restaurants in unfamiliar neighborhoods, through painful conversations, and through the honest gaze of a girl who isn't afraid to call things by their name. When Matthew finished, the silence lasted only a second before the applause erupted. His eyes sought only Fee, who was crying without shame, and Richard, who was hiding his own tears while giving a standing ovation. After the ceremony, Richard approached with good news. The judge has set the final hearing for next month. If all goes well, Fee will officially be part of our family. Fee froze, her eyes fixed on Richard. For real? Very real, he confirmed, but only if you want it. Can I think about it for a bit? All the time you need. At Mrs. Zoe's restaurant, they were welcomed with warm hospitality. After dinner, Fee pulled Matthew aside. If I agree to stay with you forever, you won't get tired of me. You won't mind sharing your dad. Fee, before you showed up, my dad and I barely spoke. You're the one who brought us closer. How could I get tired of that? What if I do something wrong? What if I'm not good enough? Then we'll talk about it like a family. Nobody's perfect. The important thing is that now we face things together, not alone. That night, back at the penthouse, Fee asked to speak with both of them. I thought about staying with you forever, and I want to, but I have some conditions. I want to keep visiting Mrs. Zoe. I want to help other kids like me, and I want Matthew to keep writing because it's important for people to know that families can be different. Special. We promise, they answered in unison. Then okay. I accept being a foster, officially. As they prepared a celebratory cake, which Richard promised not to burn this time, Matthew observed how everything had changed. The penthouse was the same, but the oppressive silence had given way to conversation and laughter. The cold distance had been replaced by genuine hugs, loneliness by a connection that transcended blood, social class, or physical circumstances. Family isn't made of blood or perfection, but of the daily choice to be present, to listen, to embrace. Together, the three of them had chosen to start over, and that, more than any wealth, was what truly mattered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Matthew, Richard, and Fee has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other stories that reveal the strength of human connection, even in the most challenging moments. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this journey of triumph and unconditional love moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the beauty of unexpected new beginnings. We look forward to seeing you in the comments